we entertain sin as an ongoing possibility and then embrace it at some point. Sometimes they'd like to think they haven't been entertaining it, so I ask the word, how long have you been entertaining this possibility? Are you revisiting it so that it becomes more attractive? Why are you not letting go of it? Because that is the slippery slope. A lot of times people think, I haven't thought much about it, I just did it. Not so. Sometimes there is a misperception that a choice we make will bring more pleasure or will have no consequences. The Bible speaks about our heart and the conversation we have inside ourselves. It goes back even to the comment in Genesis where we think God's trying to cheat us. We probably are being deprived of something that would be nice or better. And in the process, we sell our soul to an immediate gain with a significant, painful, long-term loss. I think acknowledging the sin is important so that we take responsibility for it. It's also perhaps an opportunity not to be open to it again because we understand its content better sometimes. But in the acknowledging, then ask God for strength, not only for forgiveness, but for strength to move on. He's always extending a hand and a word of grace and forgiveness. I need that every day.
God gave us the 10 Commandments really to help you and to help me get the most out of life. There was a Sunday school teacher working with her 4- and 5-year-olds, and she'd been explaining to them the commandments and had just gotten through spending a lot of time on the commandment that thou shalt honor thy mother and thy father. And then she posed a question to the class when she said, can you think of any commandment that teaches us how to treat our brothers and sisters? To which little Johnny raised his hand and said, yep, thou shalt not commit murder. It's interesting that our instincts have a way of showing up very early in life. Those who have biblical knowledge and those who don't share some stories in common. And today we're looking at one of those. Even as we talk about King David, there are 2 stories that most people in the world know about. The story of David and Goliath, where David shows us that we are to fight the giants of life, not with weapons of humanity, but with weapons of divinity, with grace and with God's strength and with that idea that if God be for us, then who could dare be against us? And then there's this other story about David and Bathsheba. Both of these events would usher David into an arena of testing, into an encounter, if you will, that would reveal then David's heart and his character in both situations. And so today we deal with this story of David and Bathsheba. There's some main characters, and that King David is involved in this, as is Bathsheba. The third character is Uriah the Hittite. Bathsheba is married to him, and he's also one of David's commanders in the army. And then there is Nathan the prophet, who will enter the story later. Act 1, Scene 1. We find David, we're told, who is at home, not in the battlefield. That's unusual. David was always in the battlefield, so this would have been a different kind of season for him. We're not told why he's at home relaxing. Maybe it's one of those skirmishes that didn't need his expertise and prowess. Nonetheless, he's at home, and I want you to understand that in the midst of this, perhaps it's a little different season for him. And so at this point, I would suggest to you that maybe he's experiencing something in his life where he's struggling with his purpose. He's used to being out in the field fighting, and now he's at home relaxing. For those of you who may not be able to turn off work and find it difficult to relax and not do anything, this would make sense to you. So maybe this purpose that David normally had been giving himself to in life, now that it's been removed, he's not sure what kind of purpose he has, and so it lends itself perhaps to an opening. And one night we're told he arises from bed. So he's not sleeping. He goes out on the rooftops and overlooks the kingdom in front of him there and looks down, and there he sees Bathsheba, a beautiful woman, we're told in Scripture. She's bathing. At this point, no harm, no foul. Turn around and go back inside, David. Oops. This is where he now chooses to enter onto a slippery slope. whereby the choices he begins to take opens doors that have their own consequences. So the first part of this slippery slope step that David takes is he calls for somebody because he wants to find out who that woman is. So he is now moving in deeper onto this slippery slope. Word comes back, she's the wife of Uriah the Hittite. David would have known immediately, I've fought next to Uriah the Hittite. He's one of my greatest commanders. He's out in the field right now. They're defending our kingdom and working for me. You would have thought that information would have, again, given him pause to stop and not go further. But he chooses to overlook that information. And after having sent someone to find out about her, he now sends for her. She comes and he sleeps with her. He sends her home. And then not too long after she sends word back, I'm pregnant. So just in these 4 verses in this story, David, King David, royal sinner, royal saint, or royal champion, royal sinner, has gone from hero to zero in terms of his character and being one of the most powerful men in all the country as the king. And it gets worse, because now he's on the slippery slope and chooses to stay there. He now gains some powerful momentum going downhill and speed as the choices he makes continue to have their consequences. Act 1, Scene 2. She has sent word that she is pregnant. David's anxiety goes out at the top. I mean, he's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? This news cannot hit the kingdom. I've got to come up with a plan. So he sends for Uriah the Hittite to come home from the battle. Because he's thinking, when a man comes home from battle, he wants to be with his wife and make love to her and spend time in the home. But Uriah the Hittite, when he comes back, he says, nope, I can't do that. As a matter of fact, he says, the ark in Israel and Judah are staying in tents. And my commander Joab and his army are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. Plan number 1 fails. So Uriah the Hittite will not go and sleep with his wife. David says, okay, let me take this a little bit deeper now, because he's on this slippery slope. He sends for Uriah the Hittite and he gets him drunk, thinking surely he will go home now. Now, in his mind the whole time he's thinking he will sleep with Bathsheba, and whether or not they make love or what anything, the word will go out. No, this is his pregnancy, not belonging to David. Commentators tell us the timing would have never worked out with all of this anyway. But nonetheless, you see, David is on this slippery slope. David sends drunk Uriah the Hittite back home. Uriah never makes it past the palace gates. He sleeps on a pallet outside the palace. So once again, the plan is foiled. So now David has to go deeper, and he comes up with another plan that says, send Uriah the Hittite to the front of the fighting. So when Uriah returns to the fighting, he is sent to the front with the word from King David that then you are to withdraw the troops that he is fighting with, so he's left alone. Well, you can imagine what that's a setup to do. It's a setup to be killed. And he is. And he dies. When his wife Bathsheba hears about this back at home, she goes into grieving, a time of mourning. Once the time of mourning is over, David sends for her, and they become married, and she bears him a child. And then we get to the summary in verse 27, where it says, but the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Now, before we hear how the Lord deals with David in his disobedience, I want us to camp here for just a moment. I hope your ears picked up on this word that I gave some extra emphasis to on sending, being sent, sending for. These are power words. You don't send for something or send somebody unless you've got some control, not only in your decisions about yourself, but over others as well. So I want you to hear in this, we see in this power, in the use of David's power, this word sending shows us his descent, if you will, from love and obedience to God down this slippery slope of calculation, of cruelty, and crime against God. Because at this point, we're seeing how this is unfolding, that he has committed a crime of sex outside of the marriage and murder, a sex crime and a life crime. David sent his armies into battle. David sent someone to find out about Bathsheba. David sent for Bathsheba to come to his house. David sends for Uriah to come home. He sends him to the front of the line over and over, and then finally he sends for Bathsheba to come and marry him. You hear the power in all this? It is this word that is highly suggestive and directive of the fact David knows what he's doing. He's choosing it. Over and over it. He's using his authority, if you will, to play out his decisions, which comes down to then you and I, can we see ourselves in this story? Because you and I, though we may say we don't have any power in life, we've got incredible power to say yes or to say no. You see, here's the thing about sin. It's a familiar story. Only the characters change. Only the characters change. You see, virtually all sin emerges out of our desire to become God ourselves. Every choice that we make comes out of this deep human instinct that we want to be in total control of our lives. And so there's this little God inside of us. I want to take charge of my own life. I want to assert control in my life and maybe even in the lives of others if given the opportunity. And I need to say something to you. That's why I see me in David's story. How about you? You see, sin is the same, only the characters change. And you're thinking, did the preacher just confess to an affair? Oh, let me tell you something. You can have an affair and never touch another person. You can have an affair with a thing. You can have an affair with a good thing. Having a work ethic that slips over to workaholism. If you have an affair with work, you're having an affair. If you've given that the top priority in your life. You see, the facts may be different, but the drive is the same. It's like, I want to play God. I want to be God in my life because surely God must be cheating me out of some pleasure. So I'm going to take a chance and think that this will be the most fulfilling, purposeful thing in my life, and so I make a choice. You see, here's the bottom line. We become stubborn and unwilling to attend the funeral of our own independence. This is the basis of sin. We become unwilling, stubborn. We don't want to attend the funeral of our own independence. Now let's see how David responds, or let's see how the Lord responds to David. In chapter 12, the Lord sent Nathan. Oh, did you hear that word? Sent. The Lord sent Nathan to David. And when he came to him, he said, he's going to tell a story. There were two men in a certain town, one rich, the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing. Nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it. It grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, it drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man. But the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David, who is listening, burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. The Lord sent Nathan, who we know to be a prophet. Nathan shows up and preaches to David. He tells a story to David. A story in which David is innocent in terms of listening at first because he listens to this story and thinks that guy is rotten. How could anybody do that? How could somebody steal something so precious that belonged to somebody else? David, you're the man. You are the man in the story. It's in the midst of this that David becomes the gospel focus of the story. You see, the gospel focus is always about us. It's always about you. It's always about me. It's always about us. It's about our actual pain, our actual problems, our sin that we deal with, who you are and what you've done, who I am and what I've done. You see, David's listening to this sermon thinking it's about someone else. But then the gospel comes into focus when those words are spoken, you are the man. You see, now this, you may find this hard to believe when people leave on Sunday morning and they're speaking to me. I can't tell you, if I had a dime for every time this has been said, I could have retired. Preacher, that was so good, they needed to hear that. Can I get a witness? Anybody? You all owe me a dime. They needed to hear that. That's the same thing David was saying. That man needs to hear how rotten he is. He took from somebody something that wasn't his. It was pure, it was undefiled, and he took it. Nathan, you are the man. David, you are the man. In our case, you are the man, you are the woman, you are the one. And David figures it out. Luckily, he comes to himself as the focus of the gospel and says, I have sinned against the Lord. He realizes his position before God. He's a sinner, a person who's in trouble, a person who needs help, a human being who needs God. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. A confession of sin is not a groveling admission of how bad we are. That's not what confession of sin is about. To be downcast and to say, I'm such a rotten person, I'm such a bad person, I don't deserve to live, on and on. Listen, confession of sin does not require beating up oneself. A confession before God is to say these words, I have sinned against the Lord. That is the gospel focus. And here's why, because that sentence is a sentence full of hope. You see, before you and I say that, we don't have any hope. There's no hope. It takes saying this because it puts us in a position that we have now recognized and responded to the very God who saves us from our sin. The title of today's message, Felix Culpa, is a Latin phrase that actually means, oh, happy sin. And you're like, well, that doesn't work. That's contradictory. Listen, this is the truth. Oh, happy sin is that moment when we realize that what we've done is a sin against God. Oh, happy day that we've come to ourselves. We now have a chance to move out in the gospel and in this great giftedness of God's marvelous grace. Sin no longer ignored, sin no longer denied, sin no longer excused. I recognize it. We are human beings, and in our humanity, we fight this basic instinct to want to be our own God all the time. That is sin. That's where sin occurs. We ignore this reality that if we become our own God in the choices we make, we've just set ourselves up for self-destruction. We'll never get to the place He wants us to get to. That's why in Psalm 51, it is David's psalm in response to this, oh, happy sin, Felix Culpa. Listen to this. This is him singing, but he's not singing. He's screaming. He's crying, have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion. Blot out my transgressions. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. Felix Culpa, oh happy sin. David has been brought back to the place where he can recognize the presence of God in his life who says, I want to save you from yourself. The reason sin feels so good to us, the reason we feel like it's so fulfilling, the reason is because it feels God-like. Because I've made the choice. You've made the choice. That's why we think it's all that. And it's not new. It goes back to Genesis in the 3rd chapter. Satan is saying to Eve, no, go on and eat. Go on and eat from the tree. Listen, don't worry about it. You're not going to die. You know what he says? For God knows that when you eat, your eyes will be open and you will, are you ready? You will be like God. Wow. And And so we play God, thinking that we know what is best for us. There's a gospel word in this for you and for me today. David's sin, as outrageous as it was, is outdone by God's grace. Not even on the same scale. Sinning really doesn't take much imagination. But grace, forgiveness, salvation, that's a kind of a creativity that is new every day in the basis of God. God is too holy to let you and to let me get away with our sin. Way too holy. But He loves us too much to let us pay for it. So what or who are you having an affair with? Pray with me. Before you, O God, guilty. I have sinned against you. I need you, God. Forgive me for trying to play God. Thank you for the gift of grace that allows me to come running to you, to bow before you, and to receive your forgiveness as I begin the motion of repentance. Bless us, Father, as we've heard someone speaking to us. Do we hear the accusation, you are the man, you are the woman? Grant to us courage to be honest with ourselves before we leave this place. Amen.